Hi, welcome to Moveeno Recap. Smashing the subscribe button is very valuable to us, so go ahead and leave us a like. Sit back and enjoy.
In 1863, Peter and his family, who were slaves on a cotton plantation, were separated when he learned he had been sold to a new owner. As the white men came to take him away, Peter prayed with his family, but their emotional pleas were disregarded. Despite Peter's attempts to resist by yelling and struggling against the men, they threatened his wife Dodian with a gun, forcing him to comply and get on the cart. However, the men still sought revenge and proceeded to hit him before dragging him away. Peter and a group of other slaves were transported like cattle in a cage. As they were taken away, his tearful children chased after him, and he promised to return one day. After a long journey, they arrived at their new destination, which turned out to be a railroad construction site. The new location where Peter and the other slaves arrived was 100 times worse than the plantation. The heads of disobedient slaves were displayed as a warning at the entrance, and they were forced to sleep in cages. Even when working hard and behaving, the white masters still hit and insulted them. To justify their actions, they quoted the Bible, making the situation even more unbearable. The area was infested with feral dogs that were set loose to pursue any slave attempting to escape. If a slave misbehaved, they would either be whipped or shot on the spot in the field. In some cases, the boss Fassel would even brand their face as punishment. Fassel had two men, Harrington and Knowles, as his trusted aides. Knowles, who was originally bought as a slave, was selected for his hunting abilities and became a guard. Peter attempted to behave and assist his friend Gordon when he fell, but was reprimanded for doing anything other than work. After a day of work, all the slaves were herded back into their cages, and witnessed John being thrown inside, writhing in pain due to his branded cheek. A slave named Tomas was trembling in fear, and Peter attempted to comfort him by encouraging him to remember his loved ones and treat the situation as just another day of work. Peter attempted to offer John the word of God and reassurance that they were always being watched over, but John scoffed at the notion and expressed doubt that any higher power cared about their situation. Nevertheless, Peter remained calm and promised to pray for him. Later, Peter overheard two white guards discussing significant news, that Lincoln had declared the slaves free and that those who escaped were seeking refuge in Baton Rouge. The guard's conversation is abruptly halted when he notices Tomas make a mistake with the food, and he decides to punish him. However, Peter steps in to defend Tomas, highlighting that he is just a child. The guard hits Peter and then proceeds to draw his gun, threatening to kill Peter for his insolence. Fortunately, Fassel intervenes and prevents the guard from taking any drastic action, intrigued by Peter's strong-willed demeanor. After returning to the cage, Fassel approaches Peter and asserts his dominance over him, declaring that he is Peter's god and Peter is his dog. In response, Peter retorts that he should be fed the same meat as Fassel's dogs. Fassel initially laughs it off, but the following day, he puts Peter in chains and forces him to kneel before him while his dog barks and growls only inches away. During the incident with Fassel's dog, the animal has memorized Peter's scent. Later, while having lunch with the other slaves, Peter informs them about Lincoln's proclamation and the possibility of seeking refuge in Baton Rouge, which would require a 5-day trek through the swamp. Although some of the slaves are hesitant, Peter convinces a few men by reminding them that their chances of survival in their current conditions are slim. After a slave dies during work, Peter is forced to drag the body to the pit where they dispose of bodies. Some white deserters who should be digging refuse to do so and say that a black man should do it, so Peter is left to fill the pit with a shovel. Peter seizes an opportunity when a distraction occurs on the field, and he attacks the guards with a shovel, takes a knife, and runs away. The other slaves and deserters see this and start running too, hitting a few guards. In the chaos, John manages to steal a gun. In brief, guards shoot and kill many runners while chasing after Peter and his three friends. Fassel orders Harrington, Knowles, and the dogs to go after Peter, who navigates them through the forest by listening out for any approaching danger. They locate the swamps and most of the team crosses without difficulty. However, Tomas gets scared of crocodiles and the dogs catch up to him. When the dogs cause harm, Fassel stops them and asks about the group's destination. Tomas doesn't respond. Fassel proposes a bargain to Tomas, reveal the group's destination, and he can leave. Scared, Tomas reveals the information and is permitted to enter the swamp. However, Fassel shoots him and leaves him to be consumed by crocodiles. In the meantime, Peter, John, and Gordon successfully cross the swamp without incident. Peter suggests exploring the other swamps, but John refuses to follow orders and takes the horse trail, confident in the gun he stole. Meanwhile, Gordon prefers to follow Peter, but Peter believes it's best to split up to avoid detection. Peter advises Gordon to follow the sound of Lincoln's cannons and go his own way through the woods. Later, Peter starts to make his own path but finds out his leg is bleeding from being grazed by a bullet. He must address the wound promptly before the dogs smell the blood. However, he decides to run for a while to create some distance between himself and Fassel before treating the wound. Soon after, Peter stumbles upon a house belonging to a white family who owns slaves. He quickly grabs a vine to use as a tourniquet for his wound and hides behind a stack of logs to stay concealed. From this vantage point, he manages to approach the water pump and notices some clothes hanging on a clothesline. Peter takes a significant risk and crosses the garden to snatch a shirt, then bolts into the forest. However, one of the family's children spots him and rings a bell, alerting the family. Fassel hears the commotion and heads towards the house, where the family informs him of Peter's escape route. Meanwhile, Peter runs as fast as he can, occasionally pausing to use the stolen shirt as a bandage for his wound. Shortly after, Peter removes his blood-soaked shirt and conceals it in a trunk for the dogs to discover, then submerges himself in the swamp water. Fassel and his team are deceived by the ruse and proceed down the path, believing Peter has crossed the swamp. However, Peter emerges from hiding after the group has passed. Suddenly, a crocodile lunges towards him, but Peter reacts swiftly and repels it with a sturdy branch before eliminating it with his knife. Suddenly, Dodian wakes up from a frightening dream in which she saw her husband in peril. Her children also wake up, concerned for their father's safety, but Dodian reassures them that he is still alive and will soon join them since he has survived things that no other man could. As night falls, Peter climbs up a tree and employs his knife to eliminate the leeches that are attached to his body, resulting in some blood droplets falling onto the plants beneath him. Meanwhile, Fassel and his team come across the lifeless crocodile and slice it open, only to discover that it's empty, indicating that Peter has fled via this route. The group decides to make camp for the night and indulge in the crocodile meat, causing Harrington to express his admiration for Peter's abilities. However, Fassel quickly reprimands him and relates a lesson taught to him by his father: giving African Americans anything, no matter how small, will lead them to demand more and take what rightfully belongs to others, such as their employment and property. The following day, Peter keeps running and takes care to conceal his body with mud and animal waste, attracting swarms of flies but successfully masking his odor. As he traverses another swamp, he reflects on his family and appeals to his lord to guard him against the monsters. When a beam of sunlight abruptly shines down on him, he regards it as a good omen. Fassel divides his group, while Peter discovers an empty treehouse with food, clean water, and hot coals. Peter uses the coals to sterilize his leg wound and takes them with him to scare off bees while collecting honey from a beehive up in a tree. Fassel spots the smoke and starts heading towards it, but Peter has already left the treehouse. While leaving, Peter encounters a snake hiding in the boat, so he gently pushes it away with a branch, gets into the boat, and sails away, relishing the honey. Meanwhile, Dodian's owner informs her that she has been sold and will be leaving in 48 hours. Dodian's children cannot accompany her as her new owner will provide her with a new husband. This news causes Dodian great pain, and despite her desire to wait for her husband's return, she decides to take drastic action to avoid being sold. She pretends to have an accident by putting her hand inside one of the cotton-producing machines. Fassel's dog helps him locate the treehouse where he finds Peter and tracks his movements as he crosses the river. Peter rushes into the woods and is surprised to come across John again. John is angry as he believes the white men will pursue him now. Despite Peter's assurance that they are not being followed, John refuses to listen and they start running. Peter also teaches John how to mask his scent. Shortly after, they hear barking dogs and quickly hide. Peter hides inside an empty trunk, while John climbs up a tree. Unfortunately, the dogs still manage to follow John's scent, leading Fassel and his team straight to him. Despite Fassel demanding information on Peter, John refuses to speak and is shot down from the tree. Fassel takes John's head and gives it to Harrington and Knowles to deliver as a message. Peter closes his eyes and says a prayer for John's soul. He stays hidden in the trunk for a few hours until he feels it's safe to come out. When it starts raining, he emerges and learns the brutal way in which John was killed, leaving him deeply disturbed. Peter continues on with a heavy heart until he comes across a group of horses running, one of which is on fire. He tracks them back to a plantation house where he discovers that everything is ablaze and all the white people have been killed. It appears that the slaves have revolted after hearing Lincoln's news. Peter cautiously enters the burning house with his knife at the ready. He explores the house slowly, eventually discovering the dining room. Overcome by hunger, he disregards caution and begins devouring the food and wine. However, he is interrupted by a strange noise from upstairs. Investigating, he finds a girl trapped under a harp, playing it in desperation. She is severely injured and in need of assistance. Peter saves the girl and brings her outside, placing her on a nearby table. He tries to fetch some water for her, but she is frightened and begs him to stay. In an effort to comfort her, she gives him her cross pendant, which he understands is a request for a prayer promising God's protection. Peter is so absorbed in this task that he doesn't hear Harrington approaching until it's too late. To avoid getting shot, he drops his knife and steps away from the girl. After leaving the dying girl, Peter is enraged to find out she has died. In his fury, he violently turns and kills Harrington by using the cross pendant as a stake. Knowles arrives on the scene, but Peter quickly grabs Harrington's weapon and shoots Knowles before he can say much. Knowles attempts to reason with Peter, suggesting that someone who can kill a crocodile could be accepted by Fassel's group, but Peter calls him the worst kind and leaves him to die. Peter heads to a beach where he finds the bodies of several white men who lost their lives in battles with Lincoln's army. Meanwhile, Fassel continues his pursuit of Peter after discovering his dog's corpse. Peter sees the approaching ships and hears the cannons, but there are no provisions for him. He starts running towards freedom but is attacked by a horse and pushed to the ground. Fassel, who had previously denied Peter meat and asked him to beg, confronts him again. Fassel pulls out his gun and asserts his power over Peter, but before he can shoot, someone else shoots Fassel. Peter denies Fassel's godlike status and is then rescued by Lincoln's native guard, led by Lieutenant Caillou. The soldiers take Peter to their camp in Baton Rouge and he's taken to the infirmary tent due to exhaustion and hunger. The nurse makes him rest as his leg wound is infected. While recovering, Peter dreams about his family. Once he's better, he obtains his new papers as a free man from one of the soldiers, but has to provide some false information such as his age. Peter is not permitted to leave and search for his family due to the soldiers' exploitation of the stolen contraband. They offer the slaves two options: work on the federal farms or enlist in the army. Peter rejects the orders but is convinced to join the army by a soldier who suggests it may aid in his family's rescue and secure his freedom. Later, Peter learns that the army has also found Gordon, who is injured but alive. Although he's happy to see him, it's difficult for Peter to inform him about John's death. Peter then approaches Caillou for his uniform and is asked if he's willing to participate in a photograph to assist the cause. Initially hesitant, Caillou convinces him that the white photographers are harmless and have good intentions. Peter learns that the photographers are taking pictures to expose the reality of slavery to the world. He agrees to show his scars from hundreds of whippings on his bare back. Later, Peter meets with the general who inquires about any information he may have on the enemy's railroad construction. Peter shares information and the general notices scars on his picture, which he interprets as a sign of disobedience. Caillou tries to remove Peter, but he defends himself by explaining that the scars prove his resilience and determination, qualities valuable in a soldier. At dawn, Caillou leads Peter and his soldiers to the trenches, delivering an inspiring speech about fighting for freedom. Despite casualties along the way, the group continues their march and joins the fight. They soon face intense gunfire, and Peter is knocked out by an explosion, lying unconscious in a puddle for a brief time. After waking up, Peter perseveres through his pain and continues to assist in the battle, firing at the enemy and comforting dying comrades. Sadly, Caillou falls in battle, and Peter later discovers his wounded friend Gordon. Moved by Gordon's suffering and fear, Peter abandons his hiding spot and charges towards the enemy lines. Peter aims to disable the cannons and, with the support of soldiers who view him as a role model, the native guard emerges triumphant. With the war over, the army embarks on a mission to emancipate slaves, visiting every plantation, including the one where Peter had previously worked. The inhabitants initially struggle to believe the news, but eventually, they come to understand and rejoice in the reality of their newfound freedom. In the end, after his former master's demise, Peter embarks on a search for his family. Initially struggling to locate them, he begins to pray and soon spots them. Overjoyed, his wife and children run to embrace him. The photograph of the actual Peter became a symbol of history, widely disseminated across the globe. Please subscribe and turn on notifications to see more videos like this. Thanks for watching.